The Chicago courtroom fell silent as Judge Winters leaned forward, his glasses catching the dim afternoon light. I sat in the back row, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching Alyssa James tremble on the witness stand. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks. The confident secretary who once strutted through my husband's office now looked small, desperate, broken. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, his voice echoing through the marble chamber, "the defendant has requested your character testimony. Before you answer." He paused, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps she should hear who owns Carter and Haynes now. Alyssa's head snapped up, confusion replacing her tears. The courtroom held its breath. 1 year ago, I was the woman they laughed at. The one they said would crumble and fade away. But when they buried me, they didn't know I was planting roots. My name is Elena Carter. And this is how I turned heartbreak into my sharpest weapon. 20 years. That's how long I believed in forever. Richard and I met at Northwestern during a snowstorm that shut down the campus. He offered to share his umbrella as we trudged through knee-deep drifts to the library. By spring we were inseparable. By graduation we were engaged. "We'll build something extraordinary together," he promised, his breath warm against my ear as we danced at our wedding. I believed him with every cell in my body. For 2 decades, I was the woman behind Richard Carter's success. While he climbed the ranks at Meridian Financial, eventually founding Carter and Haynes Consultancy with his college friend, I orchestrated our life with precision and care. I stayed up until 3 a.m. helping him rehearse presentations. I remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every preference of his colleagues and clients. I hosted dinner parties where deals worth millions were sealed over my carefully prepared risotto and vintage wine. Our brownstone in Lincoln Park became a showcase of our success. Hardwood floors that gleamed like honey, a kitchen with marble countertops where I'd prepare Sunday brunches, a library filled with first editions Richard never read but loved to display. "You're the foundation," Richard would say, kissing my forehead before heading to work. "Everything I build stands on you." I took pride in that role. The supportive wife. The steady hand. The woman who made his life function so seamlessly he never had to think about the mechanics behind it. What I didn't realize was how invisible that made me. While Richard's star rose in Chicago's financial district, I quietly pursued my own passion, a software project I'd started with 2 friends from my computer science days. We called it LumaTrack, a project management platform designed to streamline workflow across departments. "That's cute, honey," Richard would say whenever I mentioned a breakthrough. "A side hobby won't pay the bills, but I'm glad it keeps you busy." I'd smile and let him believe that. Let him underestimate me. After all, what harm could come from being underestimated? Then Alyssa James walked through the doors of Carter and Haynes, and everything changed. 27. With auburn hair that caught the light and ambition that burned like a fever. She was hired as Richard's executive assistant, a position I'd helped interview for in the past. But this time, Richard insisted on handling it personally. "She has exceptional qualifications," he said, not meeting my eyes over dinner. Her qualifications, I would later learn, included a talent for making my husband feel young again. For making him believe he deserved more than the woman who had weathered every storm with him. I should have seen it coming. The late nights. The weekend, emergencies. The way he started checking his phone during our conversations. His eyes lighting up at certain messages. But trust is a powerful blindfold. And I had 20 years of reasons to keep it tied tightly around my eyes. February in Chicago is cruel. Wind that cuts through wool coats, darkness that settles before dinner, and a particular shade of gray that hangs over the city like a shroud. It was during this bleakest month that my marriage shattered. I found the receipt by accident. Richard had asked me to grab his passport from his suit jacket for an upcoming business trip to London. As I reached into the inner pocket, my fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. The Langham Hotel. 2 glasses of champagne. 1 room key. I stared at it for a long time, the elegant cursive of the hotel's logo blurring as my eyes filled with tears. The date, Valentine's Day, burned into my vision like a brand. I'd spent that evening alone, assuming Richard was caught in meetings with overseas clients. I'd made myself pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him to call. I didn't confront him immediately. Something cold and calculating awakened in me that day. A part of myself I'd never known existed. I wanted to see how far he would go, how elaborate his lies would become. For weeks I watched him. Noticed how he angled his body away when texting. How he took calls in the bathroom with the shower running. How his eyes would drift to Alyssa's empty desk when we attended company functions together. Then came the night in March when Richard sat across from me at our dining table, the same table where we'd celebrated 20 anniversaries, and said the words that would redefine my existence. "I'm leaving, Elena." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Alyssa understands me. You and we're done. No argument, no apology. Just the cold finality of a decision already made." "Understands you," I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady. "And what is it that I've failed to understand after 20 years? He sighed, as if my question was an inconvenience. "You've been comfortable with what we have. Alyssa sees what I could become." "What you could become," I echoed. "And what's that, Richard? A man who betrays decades of loyalty for someone who's known you less than a year." His eyes hardened. "This isn't a negotiation, Elena. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The papers will be delivered tomorrow." He stood up, walked upstairs, and began packing as if I wasn't there. As if 2 decades could be folded neatly into a suitcase and carried away. I sat at that table until dawn, listening to him move around our bedroom, selecting which pieces of our life together he wanted to keep. When he came downstairs, bags in hand, I asked only one question. "Does she make you feel young again?" He paused at the door, his back to me. "She makes me feel alive." Then he was gone, leaving me standing in the kitchen where we'd once planned our future. The whispers came fast after that. "Did you hear Richard Carter left his wife for that secretary?" In Chicago's financial district, rumors travel faster than winter wind. I became the cautionary tale, the punchline, the woman too comfortable to keep her husband interested. The divorce was swift and brutal. Richard's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, made sure of that. The house went to him. The joint savings. Frozen during proceedings. Even the car, the one we bought together. He needed more for work. I found myself at 45, starting over in a small apartment in Wicker Park, watching my life's work slip through my fingers like sand. But the cruelest cut came at the annual charity gala for Chicago Children's Hospital, an event I'd chaired for the past decade. I decided to attend, head held high, refusing to surrender every piece of my former life. I was speaking with the hospital director when Alyssa's laugh cut through the crowd. She stood across the room, draped in a black dress I recognized from my own closet, one Richard must have taken during the move. On her wrist gleamed a diamond bracelet I'd seen in Richard's safe, a family heirloom his grandmother had left him. Our eyes met across the champagne fountain. She smiled, then deliberately turned to Richard, placing her hand on his chest in a gesture of possession. Later that night she posted a photo on Instagram, the two of them on the rooftop terrace, city lights glittering behind them. Her caption read, "When you win, you don't apologize." The comments flooded in sympathy for her difficult position, congratulations on their brave love, and thinly veiled pity for me. At Chicago Socialite, sometimes the heart wants what it wants. You two look perfect together. At Finance Brothers 312, Richard upgraded. Hashtag no offense. At Luxury Life Chicago, power couple alert. Sorry Elena, but they're fire together. I closed my laptop and stared out the window of my new apartment, so much smaller than the home we'd built, with a view of the elevated train instead of the lake. But I wasn't crying. I wasn't breaking. I was calculating. Because what Richard and Alyssa didn't know, what no one knew, was that Lumatrack, my cute little hobby, had been gaining traction in Seattle's tech scene. While Richard dismissed my work, I'd been quietly building something of my own. And as I watched them flaunt their betrayal across Chicago's social scene, I made myself a promise. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Spring arrived in Chicago, but I barely noticed the tulips pushing through soil along Michigan Avenue. I was too busy rebuilding myself from the inside out. The first thing I did was cut my hair. The long chestnut waves Richard had always loved now fell in a sharp, decisive bob that framed my face with new angles. The woman in the mirror looked stranger, harder, more focused. "Good," I whispered to my reflection. "She won't see you coming." I moved my remaining funds into a separate account and flew to Seattle, where my Lumatrack co-founders, Vivian and Marcus, were surprised to see me at their door. "Elena." Vivian's eyes widened. "We thought that I was falling apart in Chicago." I finished for her, setting my suitcase down. "I've done enough of that. I'm here to work." For the next 3 months I lived and breathed code. We refined Lumatrack's algorithms, streamlined the interface, and pitched to every investor who would listen. I slept on Vivian's couch, ate takeout at midnight, and poured every ounce of pain into creation. "You're different," Marcus observed one night as we debugged a particularly stubborn section of code. "Sharper." I didn't look up from my laptop. Betrayal is an excellent whetstone. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Richard and Alyssa through mutual connections. They'd moved into our brownstone, redecorating rooms I'd lovingly designed. Alyssa had been promoted to Director of Client Relations, a position created specifically for her. They vacationed in Santorini, posting sun-drenched photos with captions about new beginnings and living authentically. I saved every image, every post. Not to torture myself, but to fuel the fire growing inside me. Then came the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. Delta Systems, a major tech firm based in San Francisco, expressed interest in acquiring Lumatrack. Their CEO, Naomi Chen, flew to Seattle to meet us. "Your platform solves problems most companies don't even realize they have," she said, studying me over the rim of her coffee cup. "That's rare." The acquisition talks moved quickly. By summer's end, the deal was done. Lumatrack would become a subsidiary of Delta Systems, with my team staying on as executives. The final number made my breath catch. $28 million. I was now worth more than Richard and I had ever been together. When Naomi asked if I wanted to stay on board as a silent partner in acquisitions, I said yes, with one condition. I got to choose which companies we bought next. "That's unusual," she remarked, raising an eyebrow. "I have unusual insight into certain markets," I replied, my voice steady. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I sense there's a story here." "There is," I said. "But it's not finished yet." That night, I received a text from my friend Diane, who still worked in HR at Carter & Haynes. She'd been my eyes and ears inside the company, forwarding me memos and meeting notes that painted a troubling picture. "You need to see this," her message read, followed by a series of screenshots. Alyssa had been leaking client information to competitors, selling access to confidential financial records for personal gain. And worse, there were indications that Richard knew about it. I didn't expose them, not yet. Waited. Instead, I flew back to Chicago and rented a sleek apartment in the Gold Coast, just 3 blocks from my old home. I hired a personal trainer, a stylist, and a therapist, investing in myself with the same methodical care I'd once invested in Richard's career. "What's your goal?" my therapist asked during our first session. I considered the question carefully. To become the woman they never saw coming. 9 months after Richard left me, I sat in Delta Systems' Chicago office, reviewing acquisition targets with Naomi. We'd flown in from San Francisco for a series of meetings with local tech firms. "What about this one?" I asked casually, sliding a folder across the table. "Carter and Haynes Consultancy." Naomi frowned. "The financial firm. That's outside our usual scope. They've been developing proprietary financial software," I explained. "And they're struggling with compliance issues and bad press. Their stock is undervalued. We could acquire them at a discount, integrate their client base with Lumatrack, and expand our financial sector footprint. It wasn't a lie. Carter and Haynes had indeed created financial software, a project I'd helped conceptualize years ago. And they were struggling, though I didn't mention why. Naomi studied the prospectus, then looked up at me. This wouldn't have anything to do with Richard Carter, would it? I met her gaze evenly. Richard Carter is the least interesting thing about this acquisition. She laughed, a short, appreciative sound. You know, Elena, I'm starting to understand why Lumitrack succeeded. You see opportunities others miss. I've had practice being overlooked, I replied. It teaches you to notice things. 3 weeks later, the acquisition was approved. Delta Systems would purchase Carter and Haynes as a strategic recovery investment, with a deal structured to keep the current management team in place, temporarily. The morning the acquisition was announced, I stood across the street from the Carter and Haynes building, watching employees stream through the revolving doors. They carried coffee cups and briefcases, unaware that everything had changed overnight. By afternoon, new monitors arrived with the Delta Systems logo. Maintenance crews installed a discreet plaque beside the main entrance. Carter and Haynes, a division of Delta Systems Incorporated. Richard and Alyssa appeared in the lobby around 6, heading out for the evening. They looked tense, their conversation animated but hushed. Neither noticed me watching from the cafe across the street. Neither knew that the woman they'd humiliated now owned the building they walked into every morning. Over the next 2 months, I attended board meetings remotely, my camera conveniently malfunctioning during video calls. I reviewed reports, approved budgets, and waited for the perfect moment. Came sooner than expected. Diane forwarded me an internal memo. The compliance team had discovered irregularities in several client accounts managed by Alyssa. An audit was scheduled for the following week. That night I called Naomi. We need to accelerate the restructuring at Carter and Haynes, I said. And I want to personally oversee the audit. You're sure that's wise? She asked. Given your history. My history is precisely why I'm the right person, I replied. I know where the bodies are buried. The next morning I received an email from Richard, the first direct communication since our divorce. Lena. I've been informed that Delta Systems is sending a representative to oversee our upcoming audit. I request a postponement of 30 days to properly prepare our team. Regards, Richard Carter. I forwarded it to Naomi with a single line. Request denied. Then I booked a suite at the Langham Hotel, the same place where Richard and Alyssa's affair had begun, and prepared for my return to Carter and Haynes. The stage was set. The players were in position. And after a year of careful planning, I was finally ready to show them exactly who Elena Carter had become. The morning of the audit, I dressed with deliberate care. A charcoal Armani suit, pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 15th anniversary, and the red-soled Louboutins I'd bought with my first Delta Systems paycheck. My armor for battle. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked through the revolving doors of Carter and Haynes, a team of auditors trailing behind me. The receptionist, new since my time as Richard's wife, smiled politely. Welcome to Carter and Haynes. How may I help you? Elena Carter, Delta Systems. We're expected. Her eyes widened slightly at my name, recognition flickering across her face. Of course, Ms. Carter. The conference room is prepared for your team. Mr. Carter asked to be notified when you arrived. That won't be necessary, I replied. We'll begin immediately. The audit was thorough, methodical, and devastating. By noon, we'd uncovered evidence of systematic fraud, client funds diverted to shell companies, falsified performance reports, and unauthorized access to confidential information. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from the security team I'd positioned in the lobby. Richard and Alyssa just returned from lunch. Heading to the 18th floor. Smiled. Perfect timing. I was reviewing documents when the conference room door burst open. Richard stood in the doorway. His face flushed with anger. Behind him, Alyssa hovered nervously, her eyes darting around the room. What the hell is going on here? Richard demanded, then froze as I looked up. The color drained from his face. Elena. Hello, Richard, I said calmly, setting down my pen. It's been a while. Alyssa stepped forward. Confusion etched across her features. What is she doing here? I stood, smoothing my suit jacket. I'm overseeing the audit on behalf of Delta Systems. We found some concerning irregularities in accounts under your management, Ms. James. This is ridiculous, Richard sputtered. You can't just. I can, I interrupted. And I am. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. My team needs to work. I led them to Richard's office, my heels clicking against the marble floor, echoing in the suddenly silent hallway. Employees peered over cubicle walls, whispering behind hands. Once inside, Richard closed the door and turned to me, his composure returning. Whatever game you're playing, Elena, it won't work. I have friends on the Delta Systems board. Do you? I asked, perching on the edge of his desk, a power move he'd taught me years ago. That's interesting, considering I personally approved this acquisition. Alyssa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. What are you talking about? I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Lumatrack. My cute little hobby. It was acquired by Delta Systems last year. I'm now a major shareholder and head of acquisitions. Richard's face went slack. That's not possible. Many things seem impossible until they happen, I replied. Like a loyal husband of 20 years leaving his wife for his secretary. Alyssa stepped forward, her voice sharp. You're lying. Richard would have known if you. Richard only saw what he wanted to see, I cut in. He never bothered to understand what I was building while he was climbing corporate ladders. I opened my tablet and turned it toward them, displaying the acquisition documents with my signature prominently featured. The woman you discarded now controls 78% of this company, I said softly. Every desk, every client, every dollar that passes through these doors, it all belongs to me. Richard sank into his chair, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Why didn't you tell me? Why go through all this? Would you have believed me? Yes. Or would you have dismissed it as another cute hobby? Before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. The head of security entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. Ms. Carter, we've completed the preliminary security sweep as requested. These officers are here regarding the evidence of fraud. Alyssa's face crumpled. Richard, do something. But Richard just stared at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. You planned this. All of it. No, Richard, I said, standing to leave. You and Alyssa planned this when you decided to defraud your clients. I'm simply ensuring accountability. As the officers began reading Alyssa her rights, she lunged toward me, her composure shattering completely. You vindictive bitch. You're only doing this because he chose me over you. I didn't flinch. Actually, I'm doing this because you broke the law. The fact that you stole my husband is merely contextual. I nodded to the officers and walked out, leaving Richard staring after me, his empire crumbling around him. 3 months later, I sat in the back of a courtroom in downtown Chicago, watching Alyssa's fraud case unfold. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of systematic theft and deception, all documented in meticulous detail. Richard sat behind her, stone-faced. The board had forced him to resign as CEO, though he remained a minority shareholder. His reputation was in tatters, his social circle evaporated, his future uncertain. When the judge asked for character witnesses, Alyssa turned in her seat, scanning the courtroom desperately. Her gaze landed on me, and something like recognition flickered in her eyes. She whispered something to her attorney, who looked surprised, then approached the bench. After a brief conference, the judge turned to me. Mrs. Carter, the defendant has requested you as a character witness. Given your unique position, would you be willing to testify? The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter paused, fingers hovering above her keyboard. Alyssa's eyes were wide, pleading. Elena, please. I know you hate me, But you're the only one who can help. Please testify for me. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Before you answer, Mrs. Carter, perhaps Ms. James should hear who owns the company now. Confusion crossed Alyssa's face. The judge nodded to the clerk, who read from the ownership documents. Lumitrack, a subsidiary of Delta Systems, currently holds 78% controlling interest in Carter and Haynes, signed under majority shareholder, Elena Carter. Alyssa's face turned white. Richard's lips parted, but no words came out. I didn't need to say a thing. The silence was punishment enough. But as I stood to leave, I paused beside Alyssa and leaned down, my voice soft enough that only she could hear. When you win, you don't apologize. Isn't that what you said? A month after the trial, I received a call from an anonymous number. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. Elena. Richard's voice was rough, unfamiliar. Can we talk? I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. Please, he continued, his voice breaking. I've lost everything. The firm, my reputation. Alyssa's going to prison, and I'm being investigated as an accessory. I walked to my window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, the same view we once shared, now mine alone. What do you want, Richard? A second chance, he whispered. I made a mistake, Elena. I should have never left you. Let him talk. Let him drown in the sound of his own regret. Let him offer apologies and promises that came a year too late. When he finally ran out of words, I said quietly, Alyssa said I was old news. But I guess I aged well in power. Then I hung up. The next day, I walked through the offices of Carter and Haynes, now officially renamed Lumitrack Financial. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed. Some smiled. Others watched with cautious curiosity. I entered what had once been Richard's corner office, now mine. The space had been redesigned. Gone were the dark woods and leather, replaced with clean lines and natural light. No trace of him remained. On my desk sat a small wooden box, my grandmother's jewelry box that Richard had kept in our divorce. Inside was a note from his attorney. Mr. Carter thought you might want this back. Beneath it lay my grandmother's sapphire ring, the one I'd worn for 20 years of marriage. I slipped it onto my right hand, where it felt both familiar and entirely new. People think revenge is fire, loud, chaotic, burning everything in sight. But real revenge is quiet. It's sitting in the same courtroom as the people who tried to destroy you, and realizing you never needed to scream. You just had to wait. Now, every time I walk past the building that once belonged to Richard's empire, I smile. Because behind the polished glass and the marble lobby, every document, every paycheck, every piece of paper carries my signature. And though I never testified in Alyssa's defense, I did send flowers to her prison cell. The note said, from the woman who understands you best, the one you tried to replace. They say time heals all wounds. But that's not quite right. Time doesn't heal, it reveals. It shows you who you truly are when everything familiar has been stripped away. When Richard left, people whispered that I would crumble. That without him, I was nothing but an aging trophy wife with empty days stretching before me. What they didn't understand was that betrayal doesn't just break you. It can rebuild you into something stronger, sharper, more dangerous than before. I didn't destroy Richard and Alyssa because I couldn't let go. I did it because they needed to understand. I was never the foundation beneath them. I was the architect they failed to recognize. People think revenge is about anger. It's not. It's about memory. Remembering who you were before they broke you. I didn't destroy them to win. I simply reminded them who built their empire. This is Boundless Revenge, where pain becomes power and silence becomes a weapon. If this story made your heart race, stay with me. There are more confessions to come, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply becoming unforgettable. Comment below if you've ever been underestimated, and how you proved them wrong. Subscribe before the next story reveals what happens when betrayal meets justice. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Have you ever wondered what you're truly capable of when pushed to your limits? When someone takes everything you've built and expects you to disappear quietly. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who screams threats. It's the one who smiles and waits. The one who turns pain into patience. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked away? Or would you have planned like I did? Tell me in the comments. Justice served or too far gone? Many of you will ask about Richard's final fate after losing everything. What happened when he tried to rebuild? It's a story for another day. And trust me, karma wasn't finished with him yet. We've all faced betrayal in some form. The colleague who took credit for your work. The friend who spoke behind your back. The partner who broke promises. But we're not victims here, we're the ones who rise. If you've ever been replaced, dismissed, or underestimated, subscribe now. Because in this community we don't just survive betrayal. We transform it into our greatest strength. Don't miss next week's confession. It might just change how you see power forever. Imagine spending decades believing in someone, only to discover you were just a stepping stone in their story. Now imagine becoming the author who rewrites their ending. That power lives in all of us, and these stories show you how to find it. Remember, when they bury you, they never expect you to emerge as something entirely new. Something boundless.